Jemielniak.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Honestly, Friday evening, you didn't have anything better to do. I'm really delighted that you're all here. I can also see some Wikimedians in the corner. I really appreciate the crowd there. And I want to talk to you a little bit about disinformation. I'll start by introducing myself a little bit. I have a couple of hats. First, I'm a professor of management at the Koźmiński University. I had the Minds Department, Management in Network and Digital Societies. I'm also a faculty associate at Berkman Klein Center for Internet Society at Harvard University. Wikimedia Foundation Board of Trustees member, Polish Academy of Sciences corresponding member, vice chair, and European New School fellow, which brings me here. And my projects, which are currently the principal investigator of, are directly related to disinformation. One is about climate change denialism online. Another one is about bot detection. And yet another is about anti-vaxxer communities. But by the way, it's not about COVID vaccinations. We're studying the mandatory vaccinations. And we just won the grant 1 month before COVID started. So you can imagine how happy we were when we found out that we were actually studying something that's not particularly relevant here and now. The first question I wanted to ask you is, are you prone to disinformation? And I mean you yourself. Take a deep, hard look into your own heart. Do you believe some form of disinformation? To give you some context, 16% of Americans doubt the shape of Earth. 40% doubt if climate change is actually human-induced. Well, but these are Americans, right? So what kind of hoaxes do we believe? Is there anybody in this room who would actually raise their hand and say, yeah, sometimes I do believe something that is not really true, that is disinformation? Anyone? No, we are. Maybe them, right? Them, but not us. For sure not. Well, I myself, I totally fall for disinformation all the time. Honestly, even, I think it's impossible not to. And it's impossible not to because of how humans acquire knowledge. It's impossible not to fall for disinformation because of how we are. It's only natural to do that. And if I'm asking you, have you ever fallen for disinformation, how many of you have ever in your life gone on a diet? Liars. How many of you have ever started a new sport? Really? Come on. Maybe a friend, right? Okay, how many of you had a friend who started a diet? If they did, the chances are they didn't actually study diets. They didn't go to dietitian. They didn't really go into the lore of understanding how human body works, what you should be putting in your mouth. When you start a new sport, what do? How do people actually acquire this kind of knowledge? Well, ChatGPT is a new thing, but honestly, I don't think it's very particularly typically used for choosing a diet or choosing fitness advice. It's mostly used by students to produce essays. That's the most common use for that particular tool, and for good cause, right? I think it's a wonderful invention which saves a lot of time in some contexts. But if you're trying to get this kind of knowledge, dieting, fitness, what you do is ask your friends. You see somebody who lost some weight. Oh, how did you do it? I went on keto only. Okay, good for you. Maybe I'll try that too. You're starting a new sport. Oh, nice muscles. What did you do? Hormones, of course. Yeah, I'll try that too. So essentially, we acquire knowledge by asking our peers. And if you think about it, this is the normal, this is the standard, this is the way people get knowledge normally. Reading a book is not normal. Reading a book, going to a lecture, it's not normal. I see some puzzlement there. Yeah. When I'm saying it's not normal, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's not typical for humans as a species. 300,000 years ago, we didn't have lectures, we didn't have books. And our wiring was established back then. So hundreds of thousands of years ago, we already needed knowledge. We needed to gather knowledge, and very essentially, very vital in the very sense of this word, we needed to learn, but we didn't have the procedures and protocols of building the hierarchy of knowledge or creating university layers of formal recognition. So we had to rely on our peers, and this is what we do right now. So don't be too harsh on yourself. When you fall for disinformation, accept the fact it's only human, it's normal. Now, I'll give you an example about rutinoskorbin, which is basically rutin. Rutin is a substance that is, basically an over-the-counter dietary supplement, which could be used in some conditions, but it's very commonly used in about 16 countries to fight common cold. It's used for that reason, even though it's well proven it doesn't help at all. But it's a bestseller, people buy it, use it, fair enough. What we can see here is the sentiment analysis, dynamics, when there was a hoax that this particular product is going to disappear from stores. People run to pharmacies just to stock up, to get enough. Because they still believed it's super important to have it. Nobody really cares about the science behind this drug. Nobody wants to read it, nobody wants to know. People want to rely on what they knew. By the way, how many of you how many of you have a friend who ever used homeopathy? Really? Oh, okay. There's nothing wrong with falling for this particular hoax, right? I mean, if you don't know, if you're not a specialist, if you don't care, somebody, hopefully with more authority than you, more knowledge than you, tells you, oh, take this. Maybe it's going to help you. It's natural that we do this. It's not surprising. And the same goes for most over-the-counter dietary supplements. So let's take a step back and try to understand, where do fake news, disinformation come from? Is it a new phenomenon? Is it something that has been with us for longer? This is a page from 19th century, the so-called yellow papers, which is where newspapers began. This is how journalism started, essentially. Journalism wouldn't exist without fake news. Fake news were a phenomenon that actually made it possible for newspapers to grow and flourish. We can take an even further step back. If we look at propaganda in general and fake news spread, we'll see it's actually as old as our civilization. Octavian distributed a true will of Marcus Antonius to antagonize Romans against him. He was trying to make a case, and we have somebody who actually knows a little bit about this history in this very room. He was spreading a rumor very successfully to show that maybe, I don't know, maybe he's not well fit for running the country. In 15th century, another huge gossip spread throughout Europe about killing children for rituals. The Jews were killing our children, making food from them. Very powerful, horrible, of course, leading to a lot of murders. and spread by quite well-educated people too. So we know it's common, it's widespread, it's related to media. So what is new? Why is fake news discussed much more now? Any hypothesis? Why is it so popular now? Well, one thing that I wanted to add to the picture, fake news as a term is something that relates to a very specific phenomenon, not just not true news. Fake news is not just something that isn't true. Fake news is a phenomenon in which people hear something that is not true, they recognize it might not be true, but they still believe there might be some truth in it. It's like in this old Navajo saying, I do not know if this is what happened, but the story is true. So if you recall the story of Hillary Clinton abusing children, well, maybe she didn't, but there's something to her. This is the kind of fake news mentality. Maybe the facts are not true, but nevertheless, the narrative is good enough. The narrative is in line with what we would like to see. This is fake news. So fake news typically would have a very concrete goal. It would aim to achieve something specific. It would also rely very often on selective facts. So it would rely on something that is verifiable, and parts of this fake news will be truthful, and usually it should also spike an emotional reaction. I can give you an example from my research. When I was studying the spread of fake news related to vaccinations, this time COVID vaccinations too, there was a very popular information that COVID vaccines can result in HIV infection. And I think it's a phenomenal example of fake news. It was really beautifully constructed because it allowed people who were spreading it to link to a medical paper that had the words HIV and the vaccine in the same sentence. Well, truth being told, if you were able to read in English, if you were able to dig deeper, you would immediately understand that it's not really what the fake news is covering, but people who do not speak English, they saw these two words. They didn't go deeper to find out that it was not infection, but the false positive result of a test, and not of a vaccination, but of a prototype. So already two layers that make it absolutely inaccurate. But it was quite well designed. Many other examples that can be given here, but essentially the emotional reaction, the selective use of facts, and a very concrete goal is something that typically hold them together. Another example that you maybe recall, Pizzagate, 2016, North Carolina. A man came with an assault rifle to a pizzeria, started shooting. And this poor man was actually believing that Democrats had a pedophiliac network there. So he believed a perpetuated narrative spread on the media, which doesn't sound very plausible, right? If you think about it, really, Democrats in it's a pizzeria, maybe somewhere in the capital, but in a pizzeria, doesn't make much sense, right? Powerful people, now pizzeria. But nevertheless, it was enough. This narrative was repeated long enough, often enough, that this particular prone individual fell for that. So what we need to take from this example as well is that it's not necessarily about plausibility of information. It's also about how often you hear this. If we hear something often enough, something will go through. Which, by the way, is a lesson. I mean, if we expose ourselves to a very particular narrative over and over and over and over, even if we know deep in heart it's not true, it will likely have some effect. (2018) changed the changed the landscape of disinformation and fake news forever. Cambridge Analytica, many of you remember the scandal that arose from the fact that, as we learned, Facebook was massively allowing people to harvest, companies harvest data about users and allowing targeted information. But what we know from Cambridge Analytica for researchers of disinformation is even more scary. Michał Kosiński's research, a professor from Stanford, shows that by an analysis of our likes, we can identify things not just as simple as political affiliation, but even things such as sexual orientation, IQ, extrovertism versus introvertism, just from Facebook likes. Which means that the marketing landscape allows extremely granular approach to users. And this is what happened with Obama campaign and the Trump campaign. So if you look at fake news and political news there, we see a huge jump in innovation of how to pass fake news and fake information to people, as well as how to affect political decisions, so affect the democracy as a whole. One simple example, not related to fake news, but how can you make somebody who is a left-leaning Afro-American, how can you affect them if you want Trump to win? It will be a very tough sell to persuade this person to vote for Trump. But what you can do first, you can persuade this person that Hillary is horrible, maybe just as horrible. So they don't go to vote, right? If you don't go to vote, it still counts as a win for Trump. What you can also do, show them an ad of really attractive vacation during that period. What you can also do is try to persuade them that politicians are all corrupt and or evil, don't care about politics at all. Remember, when somebody's trying to tell you politics don't matter, maybe this is what they think, but maybe it's also a method, a mean of political influence. And by the way, I jumped to the next slide too quick, but political misinformation in 2021 was detected in 48 countries. If we realize there are about 200 countries in the world, we can immediately say, yeah, I mean, this glass is, well, we could see it as half full. I would say it's rather half empty. We detect it in 48 countries. We do not know how many actually happened. Detected in 48 countries. It's a huge phenomenon that's happening everywhere. So how can we detect fake news? I propose a methodology from Kelsey Bogan. The acronym stands for FACT. First, understand that checking facts matter. Do the simplest thing, fact check on Google. This will usually, in the case of things that are just inaccurate, immediately pop up with the actual answer. Check websites which specialize in fact-checking. In English it would be Snopes, but many other websites specialize in this too. Very often it will contain debunked myth, right? So you will hear a story and they will tell you why it's not true with links explaining why and how. Check it up on the Wikipedia. Wikipedia is actually a wonderful resource. And it's wonderful because on Wikipedia, you don't just see somebody else's opinions, you see links. It's sourced. So you can make an opinion for yourself. You can click and see why. Then A, make sure you understand how authority works. Google the publisher. One of the very common strategies used super commonly by Russian disinformation, is setting up websites with slightly changed addresses resembling popular services. So instead of CNN, you could see CMN, and so on and so forth. Or you will see CNN not .com, but something else. These strategies work because the websites look similar, and we do not really remember the address all the time, but make sure you Google up the publisher, you check the address is right, look for warnings. You can also check for bias of particular media. No media is really neutral, right? So when we're reading something, we should keep this in mind. We should keep in mind what is the bias of this particular outlet. By the way, in my research, when I was studying media affiliations used by climate change denialists and people who recognize climate change as a problem, one thing was interesting, was that everybody was using The Guardian, which is surprising because The Guardian is definitely left-wing leaning. But nevertheless, The Guardian is free to use. So I think it was predominantly a very strong cause. Has a lot of articles and has very good journalism in general. So even though it has a political affiliation, it's leaning left, people use it across the spectrum to make their claims. Then C, check content. Make sure you understand how clickbaits work. A clickbait is basically a title that tries to persuade you to click it. In the classical journalism, it would be the title, A Man Bit a Dog, right? This is the classic example. McLuhan wrote about it. In the internet times especially, it's particularly important because the number of impressions, number of times ads can be shown, is vital to sustain this business model. So if you see some shocking image, before you share, do a reverse image search. As you know, Google allows you to upload an image, look for it, and you will very often see when did it start. You yourself can often track some misinformation back to the source. This is how many researchers do it too. You see some information about some political catastrophe, some attack, you reverse search the image, it turns out it's old news. Very often, this is how you can detect it. Look for emotional language. Very often, if the narrative is super emotional, it's trying to sell you something. Look for typo, obsolete data. This will often be a warning sign. And finally, T. If it all passes, it's probably okay. If not, repeat. What can you tell me about this methodology? Oh my God, if I were supposed to do all this for every single thing, it takes too much time. Because there's a very simple law. Disinformation is much easier to spread than to fact check. You can flood people with misinformation, and requiring them to check every single thing is absolutely impossible. So obviously, we should do this for stuff we want to put our authority behind. If you publish something on the social media, well, then check, sure. Well, it's your authority. Your friends, when they see you sharing something, they trust you. For other stuff, well, use your best judgment, but use this methodology, obviously, to try to look for bullshit, because we do not want to drink too much Kool-Aid. Well, there's a lot of business disinformation too. It's not just about politics or medicine. And with business disinformation, it could be about the competition, about product, could be about research even, about the future. One wonderful example of business misinformation that I recall is a story that I wished was true, really. There was this article that was super popular in many media all around the world, that if you eat chocolate, you lose weight. Wonderful! Finally, some good news in this horrible world. unfortunately, if you really looked into the research, it turned out, yeah, there was something about chocolate, there was something about losing weight. The problem was that on a small sample, I don't remember, maybe 20 people, who were for a month eating chocolate only, you could observe a loss of weight. We all agree it's not the same thing, right? If you go on any kind of mono diet, you will lose weight, to be perfectly honest. And I do not recommend this approach. Super disappointing, but nevertheless, we see on this example how journalism works. A journalist publishing an article, chocolate helps you lose weight, immediately gets those clicks. People want to read this. What are the chances that a journalist will write an article, actually, no, they are not going to do that at all. And this is a problem. We see it's systematic. It's all linked to how media work, how we make them work, because we give the clicks. If we see this title, chocolate lets you lose weight, the chances are we are going to click because this is interesting. The fact that mono diets do not let you lose weight, not so much. Quick quiz. Which image is fake? Who says it's this one, the one with the bird? Hands up. One person. Who says it's this one? 7 people. Everybody else is asleep, I'm assuming. This one is true. And this one is obviously fake. This one is, I think, from Tallinn, or not sure about the exact location, but it was a marketing campaign. And there was, two people dressed as a bear traveling in public transport. And this one, as we can imagine, not so. Which tells us that sometimes it's very difficult to understand an image outside of context. In viral marketing, it will be very often used to the advantage. And it's still coming back to the information that is too good to be true or too shocking to be true. I want to tell you that alcohol, according to current research, is unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, is not good for you. Then, if you look at the news, you will immediately see the opposite, right? You will immediately see drink wine to live longer, drink beer to live longer. Quite a number of meta-analyses showing that overall the net benefits of alcohol drinking are not positive. I mean, drink as much as you want because it's fun, but do not drink because you think it's healthy. Let's at least be honest with ourselves. But this example makes us think, why, right? Why is the media full of nonsense about alcohol? At least 2 reasons. The first one, alcohol companies are sponsoring quite a number of publications, but I wouldn't go this route too far. I think the explanation is much simpler. We just want this news. We want to read that alcohol is good for us. When I read in the morning, drink a glass of wine and you'll live longer, makes me happy. When I drink a glass of wine the next morning, I read, oh, you're actually going to die of cancer. How good is that for me? It's horrible. I don't want that kind of news. This is why, unfortunately, the news is also geared towards information that we like, not the information that is true. And here what I'm showing you is the 2 examples of clever marketing. Maybe I'll just describe this one. At some point, there was news that broke and really almost broke the internet. Everybody was talking about it, and the news was truly horrible. There's going to be shortage of bacon. People, again, were ravaging, running the streets in panic. As it turned out, it was a result of a really clever marketing campaign from a small company, I think in Wales, producing bacon. And they didn't have a big budget, but they were smart. And there was some indication that maybe in Wales or maybe in their little borough in Wales, there could be some shortage of bacon for a week or something. But they were able to pump the media up so much that it worked. Of course it worked because journalists want news like that. Nobody cares about shortage of bacon in Wales, except for people there. Everybody who eats meat cares about a shortage of bacon in their neighborhood. So again, this taps super much into what we want to read rather than what is true. Yet another example of how misinformation works. North Face, we all know this company for sports apparel, and they did something very clever. North Face Mexico, if I remember correctly, started a super smart process. They took really good shots, really good photos of people in nice exotic places wearing North Face jackets. And they started putting those pictures on Wikipedia. Ah, smart, right? Very clever. Well, for a while. Once it was found, obviously it was a huge scandal. All those pictures were obliterated, and North Face had to apologize, and at least they got a lot of bad PR. But you have to agree, the principle was clever. We haven't seen that before. Which also shows that companies might want to, unfortunately, disrupt and contaminate Wikipedia, which is the common repository of knowledge. So even Wikipedia is not safe from disinformation if there is bad will. And there will be bad will from corporations, there will be bad will from governments, there will be bad will from religious organizations. But Wikipedia, by the way, had to deal with Scientologists very radically. We had to banish them from Wikipedia because of the repeated disinformation they're trying to put there. So, how is it done? How can we introduce disinformation to the public mind? How many of you are smokers? I mean tobacco smokers. Okay. In the 50s, there was this phenomenal ad from Camel. And it said, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. I can also tell you how they did it. They hired an independent research agency. And the research agency found out that, yeah, Camels were actually smoked. They're the #1 favorite brand by doctors. How did they do it? How did they achieve it? Do you know? How would you do it? Asking yourself, how would I do it, is always good, because then you start to think, maybe there's something to it. So what they did was very clever again. 2 weeks before the research was supposed to happen, they sent 2 cartons of Camels to every single doctor in the US. Nice. If you have independent research, better manipulate the outcomes if you can, right? This is happening all the time. It's not the 50s only. People are trying to affect the outcomes in political polls, marketing surveys, and whatnot. And it has quite a number of impressive results. Pepsi lost 4% of its value when there was a fake news spread that the CEO said Trump is not to buy Pepsi. And so on and so forth. Fake news are affecting the business world massively. By the way, 35% of Americans believe that corporations are telling the truth, and only 25% believe that the government does. So there's still higher trust in corporations than in the government. So the takeout from this is obviously that we need to be aware of where is the person trying to tell you something coming from. Selective information is also disinformation. How you present the facts is also key to what the facts are. Facts are inseparable from how they are presented. May 2021, a British PR agency hired influencers to spread negative news about Pfizer vaccine. We know this because some of them came out. Some of them came to the press. On how many occasions they didn't? Not just vaccines, anything. Hiring a ring of influencers to spread some sort of fake news is a common marketing strategy currently. With vaccinations, of course, it was a very sensitive topic. People were emotional, and for good reasons about it, so they came forward. How many of them would care about a washing powder? By the way, vaccine misinformation is, as I told you, something I studied. I will give you an example in the next slide. But now I want to sensitize you to two new phenomena that are making things even worse. One is deepfakes, the other one would be ChatGPT and the generative AI tools. Deepfakes are essentially videos modified to show that somebody in the video is saying something they didn't say or acting in a way they didn't act. So it's essentially a perfect video fake. We will not be able to trust what we see in videos anymore, which is kind of disturbing because videos were the last bastion of what was technology still impossible to do. About half a year ago, there was still a problem with deepfakes that blinking was not well synchronized in those. I don't think it's a problem anymore because the technology is advancing. And another one, as you mentioned, ChatGPT, the generation of text by AI, is also a huge problem, mainly because it makes it cheaper. I told you when I was talking about the fact methodology that the biggest problem is you need to spend a lot of time fact-checking, right? With ChatGPT, the costs of producing this information are even lower. It's essentially costless to produce this information now. I have a script that can query ChatGPT with questions and get output in the form of long text. I'm not using it for this information, but other people are. And producing specific text which sounds original used to be unachievable without human input. It is possible now. So unfortunately, for everybody, it's going to get worse. Since 2015, AI face generation is easier. By the way, fun fact, people consider AI-generated faces to be more trustworthy than actual human faces. Of course, the result is there's a plethora of fake LinkedIn profiles now with smiley face and being the coach and mentor and whatnot, whatever people put on LinkedIn nowadays. But how it is done? So far, before ChatGPT, it was crucial to have a couple of layers in the system. The highest layer were strategists, people who decide what stories we need to propagate. The lower layer were people who are actually posting them through automated means, of course. One person was responsible for hundreds and hundreds of accounts, but nevertheless, they were typically reposting it manually, mostly to avoid detection. And human labor is relatively cheap. And then there were bots which were trying to up it. Nowadays, even the content generation, so the top echelon, even the content generation doesn't really need to be done with that much human input. Of course, in the process, you will often delete old campaigns, you will change usernames, you will first build up followers, and only then try to poison the threads with something that is of value. So for example, on Facebook, you could join a Facebook group for, I don't know, clay pottery. You're interested in clay pottery, you join a group on clay pottery, and there's a lot of clay pottery content, which is valuable. So the group, it grows and grows and grows, and then every now and then, there will be something. Maybe the administrator will say, oh, you know what, I have this problem, my daughter took this drug and now she's sick. Something that maybe will stay in your mind, maybe not much. But if your circles are wide enough, and you see this information here and there, you will come out with an impression. And remember, with vaccines, for example, especially with the mandatory vaccines, I do interviews with people, with young parents who are deciding whether to vaccinate their children. Polio, measles, all the mandatory vaccines. Very few of them are radically anti. Very few. But quite many are hesitant, right? They're on the fence. They're not saying no at all. They're saying maybe not now. This is the biggest problem, right? And if you're on the fence and you see the information which is super negative, it's your child. You want the best for your child. You never want your child to experience those horrible things that you see on the social media. So you will be just a little more hesitant. This can work with vaccines, but it can work in any other context. With Ukraine, for example, there's this marvelously prepared anti-Ukrainian campaign run in Poland. And the narrative that is there is simple. Yeah, it's a horrible thing. Of course we know. We support Ukraine, but our resources are limited. They're coming and taking places of Polish children. Who would like their kid not to have the same educational chances as they did before World War? So there's a little bit of sentiment. Do not let them in our schools. Then it will be another emotional statement. Ukrainian women are coming and taking your husbands. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but better stay home, Maybe do not go help, just in case. And so on and so forth. This is how the sausage is made. And unfortunately, none of us is prone to be absolutely immune to tidbits. In my research, one of the things I studied was AstraZeneca misinformation. In my study, what we discovered was there was actually a ring of disinforming media posting regular posts about how horrible AstraZeneca is. And we linked this back to Russia. Quite a number of Russian portals were publishing this. RT, a leading Russian portal, out of 30 articles about AstraZeneca, 29 were about something wrong happening to somebody who was giving this vaccine. My hypothesis here, I do not have any proof for that, but AstraZeneca was pretty much on the same price level as Sputnik for a while. So I think it was perceived as a bigger competitor than Pfizer or Moderna at that time. But by the way, when I was researching this, I also found that European Union was using automated messaging to write about AstraZeneca and about vaccines. It's not disinformation, but also it was definitely a bot network. Botnet used for public health information, right? But still not official. Concluding, I want to show a couple of findings that come from my research, more recent research. And here I want to switch to climate change denialism, because I think this is also a very important topic that shows how often misguided our efforts are. So one thing that I studied with a colleague of mine was how people perceive zero waste. And we studied this in context of packaging. And we also did an analysis of environmental impact for those kinds of packaging. And as you can see in this example, plastic had predominantly super negative sentiment on the social media. Glass, super positive. As you probably know, it should be the other way, right? It should be the opposite. Glass is horrible for the environment. It's super heavy to transport, takes a lot of energy to wash, needs to be transported back. So with our current technology, mostly relying on gas, actually glass bottles, especially small glass bottles, are the worst. While plastic is relatively okay from the point of view of climate change impact. I'm not saying it's healthy to drink plastic bottled water. I'm just saying that it's from the climate impact point of view, it's better. People just don't understand because people like to think of one thing: glass good, plastic bad. This, unfortunately, is visible all over and over. Another thing that we discovered, and we studied 11 billion Reddit posts. One thing that we found was that people are actually discussing climate change less and less, proportionally, which is quite scary if you think about it. But human attention span is short. Oh, a squirrel. Right? This is the kind of attention we have. People have been hearing about climate change for years. Okay, maybe it's bad, but I'm fed up. I'm done. I cannot hear about climate change anymore. Unfortunately, many people have this sentiment. People live the moment, the current tragedy. That's why people were so interested in Ukrainian war. They're not so interested anymore because why don't you just stop? We need some new thing for the media. It's too boring anymore. Same goes for climate. One other interesting fact that we found is that around 2013, people started to talk about climate change instead of global warming. And if you know this case, it's super interesting because around 2007, there was a Republican strategy that was released, which was very clear. Do not use the phrase climate change, use the phrase global warming because people are scared of it less. We know this from leaked documents, which are quite well documented now. And it took a couple of years, but the change actually happened. People are not talking about global warming anymore, people are talking about climate change, which also shows us that the language can be affected and is important. The sentiment, ironically, the sentiment for climate change is much lower. It means that people do not perceive it as much worse. People perceive global warming relatively in warm terms. But I associate this fact to the fact that people who use the phrase global warming nowadays are often the old-timers. And for them, it's whatever. It's not a big problem anymore. They didn't adapt to the language change, so for them, the sentiment is still quite positive. Finally, to conclude the analysis of climate change, I don't want to tell you all the specifics of this particular study. Is maybe a little too academic. 15 million edges in the so-called social network analysis, yada yada, boring. But what we found was that people who question climate change use different language than people who recognize that climate change is real. There's quite a number of things that we found. One is about the negativity of language, another is about the simplicity of language. People who don't believe climate change is a thing use less difficult words, for example. Some could associate it to lower education, could be true. We do not know, but this is definitely manifesting very strongly and statistically significant in our study. And the final thing I wanted to show you, how do echo chambers emerge? And echo chambers is a term which reflects a phenomenon of people talking only to people who are like-minded. What we studied here, again, a data set of, I think, about 20 million accounts, is that people talking about climate change believers, climate change deniers, users referring to all other communities, and users referring to nobody but being referred to, they're growing apart. They're not citing each other, they are using different references. The real Donald Trump is, by the way, an account which many climate change denialists refer to, even though if you look up his tweets, because there are databases that are archiving them, he wasn't talking about climate change all that often. But he still remains a super important figure for people who questioning climate change as a thing. So I think on that note, I would like to transition to questions, comments, or insults in no particular order.
Hätte ich so und so gemacht. Können Sie beweisen, damit das, wo Sie die beiden Fotos hatten, das eine Foto wirklich ein Fake-Foto war? Vielleicht war das andere auch ein Fake-Foto.
My understanding is it wasn't, but I wasn't a photographer taking it. I know the backstory behind the photo as it was taken. It was a marketing campaign, so I think it's quite plausible that the photo with the bear wasn't fake. But again, this is a very good question. How do we actually know? How do you know that you were born? You don't really remember it, right? How do you know that right behind you there isn't Joseph Stalin smiling? All the time, by the way, all the time behind you. Huh? Well, take any figure that you believe, we don't know what is behind us, we have to take a leap of trust. And this example might be a little too extreme, although in philosophy it's used. I would say, how do you know what you don't have expertise in? What's your field? What is your specialization? If I may ask, of course. Whatever it is, how do you know anything that is not something that you specifically studied for 20 years? We have to take a leap of trust. And those leaps of trust can be bigger or smaller. They are bigger when we really trust the source. For example, when I go to the doctor tells me something. Well, if I don't believe it, I'll go to a second doctor, maybe a third doctor, but I will nevertheless assume I am probably better off asking specialists than Googling it. That's a pretty safe bet. But if I wanna, I don't know, repair my computer, I'm not going to go to a specialist. I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours Googling it on the YouTube or something like this, probably break my computer in the process, but nevertheless, I will do it myself. I will feel, it's my responsibility and it's okay. And of course, there's a huge plethora. Depending on what the stakes are and how much it's worth to you, you will either take a big leap of trust or not a big one. In this case, you can assume I'm telling you the truth, but you can also look it up. Nobody's prohibiting it. You can look up a campaign with a bear on a public transport, and you will see. And maybe it is fake. Do your research. Yeah.
Why ChatGPT can't prove disinformation, because actually it does many things that Google can, and you said in the facts sheet that I have to Google. Can be work for the other side, like proving some information where I'm not sure? I don't know, because you talked.
Well, currently ChatGPT, first of all, it's still a prototype. So we have to keep this in mind. It's a super advanced, wonderful, amazing tool, but it's still a prototype. A prototype which, unfortunately, sometimes will produce fake results, even including fake links to stuff that will appear as links to academic journals. If you click on them, nothing will open, but they will have, I don't know, Springer and whatnot in the address. This is so because ChatGPT is a perfect tool for guessing what would look nice in the answer. This is the basic principle of this particular technology, to make a very good guess of what would look like a proper answer. Sometimes it will be true, sometimes it will be not true. And of course, there are layers and layers and layers of corrections that are introducing there, so that people do not produce false results, but the principle remains. So in all stuff that they have not blocked yet, you will get false results if you phrase the question in a way that will make a false result more likely than an actual result. That's why you cannot really rely on ChatGPT for misinformation detection so easily. However, I could totally see generative AI used in this respect in the future, very near future. And I think there's a very strong promise that there will be a bot battle, right? Disinformation producers will be producing with generative AI tools, and they will be debunked as we go, but it's also always reactive. So if we look at disinformation as a social problem, we cannot rely on tools only, because it's too late. First of all, it's spreading on the social media. Second of all, you can only detect it once it gets up. I'm currently producing a system for medical misinformation detection for the Polish government. But again, we can only detect what is already out there. When it's out there, it's making damage. So there are important things that need to happen. One is institutional things, policy. I think social networks have to be held accountable. I don't understand how is it possible. They're benefiting from it. Their business model relies on spreading stuff that is viral rather than truthful. And nevertheless, they are not held accountable for spreading it. So that's one thing. Another, unfortunately, we need to take responsibility too for what we're sharing, but also for being critical in what we're saying. And by being critical, it doesn't mean questioning all authorities. It doesn't make any sense. By being critical, I mean, well, let's assume, how would I try to fake this? How would I do this? With my students, I very often give them a task. Read this research and tell me, how could this be faked? How could this be rigged? It's a good exercise, for researchers especially. But what we need to also understand is that there is a hierarchy of knowledge. If you see one medical study result, typically it means nothing if there's 100 stating the opposite. There's a hierarchy. There are meta-analyses. There's advances of knowledge. People who do not understand, for example, what impact factor for academic journals means are very easily misguided. They see, oh, but this was an academic journal, but they read it in something that wasn't an academic journal, unfortunately. It wasn't a proper academic journal. People who are not scholars, unfortunately, are, by definition, not very able to distinguish this. That's why we need to trust scholars often. Scholars have their own problems. They're not perfect at all. There are many misguided studies, but we don't have anything better, unfortunately. So that would be my my answer to too long answer to ChatGPT thing. Say it again. Twitter.
Sorry.
Just saying, Twitter as well is a source of, because it's spreading many information at one time, you know, and so in the future I have to be more careful with that. What I'm reading on Twitter, I don't know.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily discriminate between Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and all social media. TikTok as well, yeah, it's a social medium, yeah, with short video. And by the way, a lot of misinformation on TikTok. I wouldn't distinguish all that much between them because the modus operandi is very similar. People are putting some sort of information there with the hope of this information being read and widespread. Especially people who are influencers, so their income relies on how many people will click rather than how right they are. There's a very strong incentive to spread stuff that people will want to read rather than that is accurate. Nobody wants boring stuff. So Twitter, yeah, Twitter is prone to this phenomenon as well. There are specifics that are specific to Twitter, but I don't want to go into too many details. Twitter is, as you know, in big trouble now. We do not know if it's going to be around for long. So, yeah.
Ja, Ihr Vortrag war wirklich sehr interessant und Sie sind ja nun schon beruflich ein sehr netzaffiner Mensch. Wie gehen Sie vor? Wie mixen Sie also Informationssuche oder Arbeiten im Netz mit dem Lesen von Monographien und dem Machen von Wirklichkeitserfahrungen in der wirklichen Welt? Wie gehen Sie da selber vor?
Yeah, it's a good one. As I started this presentation with telling you that everybody is prone to disinformation. Me too. In the areas where I'm not an expert in, if I read something, well, I often will consider it to be true. However, I think one difference from what people typically do in my consumption of media is that I don't trust anything that is on YouTube. I don't trust anything that some random Joe with so many followers put somewhere. I don't care. I mean, if somebody tells me, oh, you need to see this, what do you think? And it's a link to YouTube or a link to some post on the social media. I tell them, I gladly read it and comment, but please show me an actual published academic research about it. So I have a strong preference for academic sources. And I think it's a good approach, honestly. Maybe I'll miss some breaking news every now and then, but I highly doubt it. I think that knowledge science develops through adding those little tidbits to the body of knowledge in academic publications. I'm privileged that I'm a scholar, so I'm trained in reading those. I can read medical papers as well. I'm not a doctor, but I can at least read the content, see the statistical analysis. I will understand if there's fake. I will not make medical decisions based on it, because I'm not a doctor, but I will at least see if there's a disinformation that somebody's spreading, because disinformation is my thing. Other than that, I strongly advise you not to get any information from the social media at all. Doesn't make any sense. Why? Why would you do this to yourself? It's like going on a Big Mac diet every day. I do recommend reading Wikipedia, though. Wikipedia is a wonderful source of information. It's actually there is research showing, and again, I'm biased, right? I love Wikipedia. That's my thing. I'm a Wikipedian. But you do not need to take my word for it. That's the beauty of it. Look up academic research about Wikipedia. That's what you need to do. And if you look it up, you will see that, for example, medical students who prepare for exams based on medical textbooks versus students who prepare for exams with medical textbooks and Wikipedia have better results. You will see that the quality of information and the number of errors on Wikipedia is on par with professionally published encyclopedias, psychological textbooks, medical textbooks, and so on and so on. So the research is out there, and there's lots of scholars who are interested in studying how accurate is Wikipedia. So you can look it up easily, hundreds and hundreds of publications, also meta-analysis. So don't take my word for it. Please go scholar.google.com. You will be able to look up academic papers and decide for yourself.
Yeah, maybe let's continue on this. Of course, Wikipedia can be one first step, but I'm currently at the stage of being a bit depressed or disillusionated about the future because we cannot really trust texts so much anymore, videos and such. So it's even your FACT recommendation will change because Google already has announced to get rid of the links. Instead, well, it will use wants to use bots as well. So what can we do? I know you know me. I know you. You know that I'm a classical philologist. So I've years and years of expertise on reading through texts and looking for the truth, etc. But what can we do in the general public? So the years before I was always thinking about class at school, like media competence, something like that. Does that exist in Poland? Would that be a solution? Because it's getting more and more difficult to actually find the truth, which actually is true, because of course you build your own truth all the time anyways, but how can we make it a better world?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, on Friday evening, I will tell you how to find truth. I'm not sure. What I can tell you is that I think understanding the hierarchy of knowledge is not something that will change immediately. So understanding what are academic journals, how does the university system work, for good and for the bad, right? Understanding also how scientists are biased, how does funding some research affect the study. For example, if I read a study that said alcohol is great for you and it was sponsored by Jack Daniels, I would be still happy to read it, but I would probably not necessarily trust it. So we need to understand how does the system work, how the system works. Critical thinking, understanding the specific techniques of manipulation. For example, understanding how does the cherry-picking technique work, or how does the no true Texan argument work. It's important. And there are many deceitful rhetorical strategies that are used in narratives around us, and we need to immunize ourselves against those. So learn rhetoric. It's very paradoxical, but we're going back to the classics, right? Learn rhetoric, get a general good understanding of how the body of knowledge, how the system of knowledge works. Use critical thinking, understand how the sources work, understand the basic of how academic research is done and can be done. Sometimes I see something is absolutely nonsensical because I know it's impossible to come to this result. As a social scientist, I sometimes see that somebody claims something that is unfortunately impossible to prove. So knowing basics of research methods definitely helps, but whether this can be achieved in the general public by putting these programs in the schools, I don't know. I think media competence, critical thinking are important, but without policy changes, without holding social networks accountable for the damage they're making, I don't think it's going to happen. But look at it like the tobacco companies from the 50s. A lot of damage. We needed to wait for decades and decades and decades, but finally something changed. Maybe it will be the same with the social networks. So after decades and decades of poisoning our minds, maybe somebody will do something about it, or maybe it will be too late. I don't know.
Sie sagten erst, Google ist ein super Medium, um zu recherchieren. Ich weiß nicht, wie es in Polen ist. In Deutschland sind die Algorithmen so eingestellt, damit man keine Chance mehr hat, überhaupt zu recherchieren, richtig zu recherchieren. Wikipedia, weiß ich, ein gutes Beispiel, da wird ein Wikipedia-Eintrag, man kann schon sagen, nach Stimmung geändert. Mal ist die Person Verschwörungstheoretiker, mal Prophet, was gerade passt. Und er hat keinen Einfluss darauf, auf diesen Eintrag. Warum? Und das, glaube ich, ist bei sehr vielen Einträgen. Ein Kollege von Ihnen, Professor aus Österreich, ein Biologe, ist vor ein paar Tagen höchstwahrscheinlich an Selbstmord gestorben. Und die Ursache höchstwahrscheinlich sein Wikipedia-Eintrag. Also
well, this is a very heavy piece of information. I definitely hope people do not make serious life decisions after reading just a Wikipedia article. But regarding the quality of Wikipedia, let's get back, maybe let's get from this emotional state, horrible information. I'm really sorry it happened. Especially if this was as a result of reading a Wikipedia page, that's absolutely horrible, and mistakes do happen on Wikipedia, I agree. But let's get back to the less emotional state. Wikipedia can only work in practice, it doesn't work in theory. So the theoretical random strangers editing stuff with all the biases, it cannot work. Yeah, but we know the results. And we evaluate the results. We do not think how this would be in theory. We see the results and they are quite accurate. But if you look at Britannica is not perfect. On Britannica, the number of errors in 2005, there was a study published by the Nature journal, Nature, the most respected academic journal in the world, which showed that the number of errors on Wikipedia and Britannica is the same. Since then, Wikipedia has improved significantly. So let's keep it real. Sure, it could be that there is a mistake on a Wikipedia page, and it happens all the time, of course. But again, with 7 million articles, it's still quite good that it happens very, very rarely. Second, Wikipedia articles that are the best, absolutely the best, are the ones that are super controversial. If you look at articles about homeopathy, about abortion, George W. Bush, these will be the best articles Wikipedia has. Why? Exactly because of what you said. People with their own biases, strong opinions will come and they will edit. But people with strong views from the other side will edit too. The only things that can stay will be actually well-sourced pieces of information. So the articles, paradoxically, the articles that are not really good on Wikipedia will be the ones nobody cares about. It could be a bio of some not particularly interesting or important or known politician. Yeah, very often it will be biased. For years it could be either super glorifying this person or very badly putting them in the bad light. But my answer to this is, yeah, but the damage is super little because nobody cares about this article. So Wikipedia automatically makes the most important articles, the ones that people care about, also the best ones. It's by design. If people care about this article, people from all different angles will come. We know this from open source. Raymond, a famous researcher of open source, once said, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And it means that if enough people see some piece of information, it will get better and better and better, it will be refined, there will be more resources, more refinement, even with homeopathy. I'm super happy when people believing homeopathy come try to edit Wikipedia, because sometimes maybe they will add something valuable. And they should, right? I'm against homeopathy, they are super for, but if they find an article, an actual academic article saying it could be used for something, mazel tov, go for it. So far they didn't, but no, they will come. So the answer to this is, yeah, Wikipedia is super strong, super robust in topics that people care about. And about this particular article, I'm sorry, I do not know the context. I do not know why, but it's possible, absolutely possible that this happened. Huh? Right.
It was 2 people.
Right. As with any piece of news, any piece of published information, it can definitely damage, bring horrible results, and it's a fact. I can only say it's super depressing and sad.
Ich wollte noch sagen, es handelte sich um 2 Wikipedia-Einträge, ein Deutscher, ein Österreicher. Bei dem Deutschen fast wöchentlich wurde da irgendwas geändert gegen seinen Willen und Desinformation. Und der andere, es ist nur eine Vermutung. Nur der Betroffene kann 100% sagen, warum.
Right. Just to be clear, there's one Wikipedia in German that is probably the most popular one. I'm not sure which 2 versions you're referring to, but maybe there's some context I'm missing. Definitely, it is possible that somebody goes to a Wikipedia page, adds some misinformation to it, especially if it's not sourced. It can stay for a couple of days if this article nobody cares about. Definitely possible. If it's a situation when somebody sees some wrong information introduces actual facts with sources, it's very rare that this improvement doesn't stay. But again, without knowing the context, it's very difficult for me to comment. I can only tell you how it generally works, not about this particular case.
We have a question.
Ja, ich möchte noch mal hartnäckig bleiben. Also ich insistiere darauf, dass es also neben Social Media und meinetwegen philologisch interessanten Texten auch noch eine gesellschaftliche Wirklichkeit gibt. Also ich nenne das Sondenprojekte machen. Wir sind ja jetzt hier auch in einer realen gesellschaftlichen Wirklichkeit. Also wie mixen Sie Ihre Erfahrungen aus Netzerfahrungen, Texterfahrungen und Erfahrungen in der gesellschaftlichen Wirklichkeit? Und zweite Frage, für wie wichtig halten Sie Komplexität von Wissen, von Informationen, also für die Wahrheitsfindung, so weit wie möglich?
That's a good one. Regarding the first question, I think it's a little easier. I don't believe in a separation of digital from non-digital. I think human relations, interactions are super complex. They are not relying, well, it has been true even before the digital world. There were phones, there were letters. You could fall in love by corresponding with someone. Most Americans under the age of 20 meet their significant other dating online. And so on and so forth. So intermediation by technology, I don't think is such a distinctive factor. We are all soaked in different kinds of technologies that are affecting how we make relations with human and non-human actors, but I wouldn't differentiate it as much. So some people, I do have friends whom I only know from the online world, but I know that if I call them and ask them for a possibility to stay on the couch, they would be glad to see me. So I think the ship is gone, it's done. Regarding complexity though, I think it's a very important question, because my fear is that the complexity is lowering. And we also know that the systems of higher complexity can carry more subtlety and more information, basically. So the current problem with the academic body of knowledge is that it's mostly evolving through articles. Articles who fewer and fewer people have the time to read. The complexity of so the body is growing, but it's not dense anymore. It might crumble. So regarding this, I think it's a very, very good question and a very important problem that deserves a dissertation. But my intuition, I do not study this, my intuition is that the complexity is actually a huge issue. The complexity is lowering and lowering, and we were dumber and dumber as a result. Sorry to give you such an answer, but this is the one I have.
Ich komme.
I think we have time for one more question, correct?
Okay, ausnahmsweise. Guten Abend erstmal. Sie haben vorhin erwähnt, dass irgendwie die Social-Media-Kanäle irgendwie mehr Verantwortung übernehmen sollten, zwecks Fake News. Und wie stellen Sie sich das so konkret vor? Sollen die Fake News vorher rausgefiltert werden oder muss man das erst melden? Und wie ist es halt bei Ländersache? Wegen Internet hält er nicht an den Grenzen halt an. Und dann über VPN lässt sich das ja auch noch umgehen mit den Ländern. Und wie sollte man das umsetzen, also mit der mehr Verantwortung? Ne? Und dann könnte es ja auch mehr zu Missbrauch führen. Auch Beispiel, was mir so einfällt, so IMDb, die jetzt von Herr der Ringe die Bewertung halt deaktiviert haben, weil es eine Eigenproduktion war. Und ja, was halt, wie sich halt da konkret vorstellen.
Very good question. I think there's a couple of layers of approaches here. First of all, let's assume that fake news are like tobacco. They're giving you cancer. How on earth were we able to introduce limits on tobacco sales? By regulation, by identifying and proving by research the damage, by measuring this damage, by fining the producers. So I would say that the first step would be measurement. One thing that I find super disturbing is that I, as a researcher, I have to scrape data sets instead of having a privileged free access to be able to study it. This would be the first step. Allow researchers to study it so that we even know the scope of this information. Second, I assure you, Facebook, Twitter, all social networks, they know perfectly well how those disinformation circles grow. They know because they have better technologies, better researchers, better budgets than me, and I see it too. So they know it. The question is, how are we going to hold them accountable? And I say the only way is the money. Make the system such that they do not benefit from spreading, they are actually hurting from spreading disinformation. And they, of course, this could be done in different ways, but if we had boards that are evaluating particularly damaging misinformation that is being spread, fining them hefty fines, this would be a good start, in my view. I think it would be really good to start from the top. And actually, if you eliminate the most damaging ones, maybe the small fish can stay, because it doesn't do that big of a damage. So this would be my practical approach to this problem. And I think without holding them accountable, it won't work. So transparency, open data, creating boards that will evaluate it, and very strong policy that is fining. Look at another analogy, child pornography. How we were able to deal with this? I think we have to agree, this problem has been relatively well addressed on the internet. There's no popular website that would actually be accessible that you could see child pornography. Probably if you're into it, you will find some ways, but you either will be caught or it will not be so easy. So if we look at disinformation and actually killing disinformation, because disinformation kills people, as a problem of serious magnitude, I think we will be able to find solutions. Although, I have to add a pinch of salt here, censorship is something that needs to be treated with extreme caution. So I would be quite reluctant if it was the government bodies that were deciding what should be allowed, what shouldn't. But if it's like community elected bodies, if it's the NGOs that are participating in evaluation, I would be much more comfortable. Universities, research community. And the final question.
Desinformation in Bezug auf bewaffnete Konflikte, ist die Rolle zunehmend oder täuscht das nur? War die Rolle schon immer relativ präsent?
Oh, it's an easy one. It's super growing. Super in an armed conflict, budgets, military budgets for disinformation are growing. I think it's telling a lot. Basically, you win a war, of course, not just through information, but information is an important part. Information warfare is something that people study at military academies now. It's something that people get paid for to do as military soldiers, and something that that you need to be doing because it affects the results. It's prior to the conflict. It's the hybrid conflicts, which are heavily relying on informational warfare, and it's during the conflict. By the way, Ukraine, I think, is doing marvelously well. Managing the social media and managing the narrative in this respect. And on that note, I wish you a very good weekend. Thank you so much.